I'm Michael Hudson, and I'm the president of the Institute for the Study of Long-Term Economic Trends. I've written over 10 books, and my first and still my most popular book is Superimperialism, the Economic Strategy of American Empire. That's been published in Chinese a long time ago, and there's a third edition that is about to be published new. I've also published The Destiny of Civilization. That's going to be out in Chinese also quite shortly. And for many years, my history of trade theory, trade development and foreign debt has been translated into Chinese and used as a textbook throughout China. And many of my articles have been published by the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, as well as by Peking University, where I was a professor of economics for 2 years. I've published many editorials in American newspapers, the New York Times, the Financial Times, Washington Post, and many European newspapers, and cover stories in the major American magazines, such as Harper's Magazines and many others in the United States and Europe. I've been an advisor to the U.S. government agencies, the White House, the Defense Department, Energy Research Development Agency, the Department of Education, and the State Department. And I've also been an advisor to Canada, Mexico, and Latvia. And many governments have brought me over for discussions of economics over the last 50 years. So in the United States, I'm still a professor at the University of Missouri in Kansas City. That's the center of modern monetary theory in the United States. Before that, in the 1960s and 1970s, I was a professor at the New School in New York City, when it was one of the most progressive American universities at the time. I was teaching trade theory, and my lectures there became the book on trade development and foreign debt that I mentioned has been used in China. For 25 years, I was associated with Harvard University's anthropology department, dealing with Babylonian economic relations in the second and third millennia BC. Now, this may seem strange for an economist, but the Harvard group that I organized have written what is now the new economic history of the Bronze Age Near East, and that's where Western civilization's economic practices originated. So it's part of my whole long economic history of debt and finance. And my aim, and the aim of the group that I organized through Harvard, was to trace the origins of money, debt relations, and land tenure for the last 5,000 years. Our colloquiums have published 5 volumes, and these have rewritten the economic history of urbanization, privatization, account keeping, money, and debt cancellations, and how early society avoided economic polarization by canceling personal debts and agrarian debts when they threatened to transfer property to creditors and polarize society. Well, this is exactly the problem that is happening today that modern Western society has not solved. And the ending of Near Eastern debt cancellations in ancient Greece and Rome, when financial oligarchies took over and monopolized the land, that is what has made Western civilization so different from everything that went before, and what makes it different from China today. And the result is that America and Europe are now suffering from a debt deflation. There's so much debt that has grown up since World War II that people do not have enough money to buy the goods and services that they're producing. And so the United States and Europe are deindustrializing. They are simply being pushed into a permanent economic depression as a result of the debt. And China has debt strains also, but it's been able to avoid the problem that the West has simply by writing down the debts instead of forcing companies and families into bankruptcy. China's doing what Near Eastern civilization used to do, but is not being done in the West today. And that's why China and its allied countries are pulling so far ahead of the West. China has kept money and credit creation in the public domain, in the hands of the state, not letting it into private hands. And so it's the state that plans the economy to raise living standards for everyone and to increase your productivity, your industry, and your agriculture, instead of simply extracting debt service, interest and fees in the United States. China is still trying to make economic progress economically, industrially, and agriculturally, whereas in the United States, people try to get wealth financially, not by industrialization, but in ways that actually hurt the industry there. So I've been visiting China for about 15 years. I was given an honorary professorship in Wuhan. And as I mentioned, I've lectured at other universities and in Hong Kong. And the reason why I focus so much on China is that your country is the land of the future. China has shown itself to have the most productive industrial policy in the world. That's why your growth has been so much faster than the growth of any of the Western countries. And fortunately, as I said, you've kept money in the public domain. You've avoided deindustrialization. And it's very strange. If you look back 100 years ago, nearly all the economies expected the Western capitalism to evolve into socialism, to evolve something along the lines that China has done back in the 1920s, even the late 19th century. Europe and America were expected to increase government spending on infrastructure, to provide basic needs freely to all the citizens, at least at subsidized rates, education, healthcare, but also communications, roads, transportations, phone service, research and development. That was what was expected. But as you know, it didn't happen. And especially all of that dream has been rolled back in the West since the 1980s. Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan were sort of the symbols of the change that occurred as what began as industrial capitalism in the West turned into finance capitalism. And that has been a disaster. The public sector was privatized. Public housing was privatized. Housing costs went way up, doubled, tripled, quadrupled in England when they went up. Same thing in America. Housing prices are soaring. Economic planning was taken out of the hands of Washington and other Western governments and put into the hands of Wall Street and financial centers to make money financially. And you can make money financially in America by deindustrializing, close the factories down, make them into luxury housing for financial managers and people who inherit a lot of money. And all of a sudden, you have factories turned into luxury real estate, but they're not making goods and services anymore. There's no machinery. There's no employment for the blue-collar factory workers that used to make goods. And what that means is that the wealthiest 1% of the population do the economic planning, and they plan how to make money for themselves, not how to make money for the 99%. They do it in their own interest. So I think the one thing that I can do that may be helpful to China is to explain where Western capitalism went wrong and what problems China and other countries need to avoid so that you don't end up looking like the United States and Europe are looking today. And the most important need is to be familiar with the whole reform program that was developed by industrial capitalism itself in Europe, in the United States in the 19th century, when industrial capitalism took off. The whole idea was to get rid of feudal privilege, get rid of feudalism, get rid of the landlord class, get rid of the financial class. These are exactly what China's revolution was all about, to free yourself from the old ruling class. That seemed to be the wave of the future in the United States, but it was all rolled back. There was a counter-revolution after World War II, a counter-revolution against labor, against industry, and the West is still living in the results of that problem. Well, the most important need is to be familiar with this reform program. And these reforms, you call them Marxism, and of course they are Marxist in China. But Marx himself was in the last great classical economist. The reform program began with the French physiocrats in the 18th century, with Adam Smith, with John Stuart Mill. They wanted to get rid of unearned income. And what Marx did was say, now that you've shown that landlords are unproductive, they simply have property rights, employers also exploit labor. Marx took the classical economics and elaborated it. He believed that the fight of the future would really be between labor and its employers. He believed that Western capitalism was going to solve the problem of feudalism. He believed that the industrial capitalists would get rid of landlords and absentee landlords. He believed that Western capitalism would end predatory banking, that it would make banking a public utility, as seemed to be happening in Germany, and that banking would help finance industrialization of the West. Well, and what's happened instead after World War I, all of this was changed. And instead of banking being industrialized, Western industry, Europe and America, were financialized, just the opposite. So capitalism did not work out in the optimistic way that Marx believed as evolving into socialism, but it actually went backward in the other direction from socialism, back towards feudalism. And that's what's happening still in the United States and Europe today. And that's the problem that China has been able to avoid. Now, obviously, you still have real estate problems, you still have financial problems, but the government is able to solve these problems, and you don't have an independent financial class that's trying to prevent you from solving these problems, which is what happens in the West. All of this was discussed in the 19th century. I can't tell you how China is developing really, because my specialty is the West. But what I can explain to you is the problems that the West is having, and the character of the Western fight against China today, why there's a fight, and why the Western economies are self-destructing. When I began to lecture at Chinese universities 10 or 15 years ago, I met with students, and there was such a positive approach that I didn't find in the United States. The students, whether it was in Beijing or Tianjin or Wuhan, they all felt that there was going to be a whole change in society. And they realized that China was in the process of being transformed. And they all felt that they could play a role in steering China along ways that made prosperity for the entire country, that got rid of corruption. They realized the need to have private enterprise to make innovations, but they also saw the need to prevent people who were innovators from becoming billionaires. There had to be a limit. They realized that wealth had to be socialized, and that there was no spirit like that in the United States. The students that I talked to here felt like they wanted to withdraw from economic studies. For one thing, most economic studies in America stopped talking about finance. They stopped talking about government. They stopped talking about economic history. And in America, there was not even the history of economic thought anymore that was taught. All that was taught was mathematics. And so the economic curriculum didn't have any room for what I'm talking about. A few of us at Kansas City were talking about money creation and the need to keep money in the hands of the state instead of letting it in the hands of private banks. But that university was very minor, and many of our faculty ended up being advisors to presidential candidates, and we did what we could. Stephanie Kelton was an advisor to Bernie Sanders. I was an advisor to Dennis Kucinich when he was running for president. But the fact is that the bulk of the Democratic Party is controlled by Wall Street, just as the Republican Party is controlled by Wall Street. So I didn't see, and my students did not see a chance to actually solve the problems that are plaguing the United States. Same things in Germany. All three major German political parties brought me over to address their annual conference. I think I was the only person that all three parties paid attention to the economic theories. The Frankfurt Allgemeine Zeitung, the newspaper of the Christian Democrats, had many articles with me in German. The Social Democratic Party brought me over numerous times for the Buckley Stiftung in Berlin, and the left-wing party, Die Linke Party, brought me over through the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation to talk about the future of Marxism in Europe. But all of the three German parties have all been hijacked by American meddling in Germany, as it's meddled in the rest of Europe, to promote pro-American politicians, so that the politicians who lead the political parties in Germany, England, and the rest of Europe really act on behalf of the United States. They've been groomed by the United States State Department agencies to represent America, not Europe. And so the Europeans don't feel that they have any ability even to shape Europe and get rid of this war that the United States and NATO have declared on Russia and China. The businessmen in Germany have all said, we are being destroyed by America's war against Russia and China. We want to deal with Russia and China because that's where the world growth is. And America says that we have to be American colonies, and we can't control it because our governments have been hijacked by the Americans. And as I said, my American students think there's nothing they can do in America because the American politics of the Democratic and Republican parties have been hijacked by their campaign contributors. We call them the donor class, the class that finances the political campaigns in the United States, mainly Wall Street and the big monopolies, the oil and gas industry, the mining industry, but mostly the banking sector has hijacked politics. So there really is no democratic politics in the West. They call themselves democracies, but what they really are oligarchies, and they're financial oligarchies. I realize that the economies of Europe and America are being closed down. There's really most of the evolution and the growth and the progress is going to be occurring in China and Asia, and that's why I'm doing my work here with you in the lectures that I'm giving here.